Church here, and welcome to the Game Grinder, and today we're doing my MGC 2019 pickups video. This is the third video in my MGC series, so if you haven't seen the previous two, I definitely recommend checking them out. The last one was my MGC 2019 experience video, where I basically talk about the experience, who I met, show pictures, and then the first video I released was actually the Midwest YouTube Gamers panel that I participated in along with Chris, the old-ass retro gamer, Jason of Corpse Flood Gaming, Musty Hobbit of Second Breakfast, Captain Algebra, and Taylor of Rising Blue Phoenix. But along with those, I am super excited to talk about the things that I picked up at MGC this year. So let's get right to it then. So before I get into the actual MGC pickups, I got some friend hookups. So before that Friday when we went to Milwaukee to MGC, Jason of Corpse Flood Gaming came down the night before, and every time he comes down we always kind of have like a little exchange with each other, and he hooked me up with some pretty cool things. First thing here is the Metal Gear Solid Limited Edition. Now I already had Metal Gear Solid 4, but I did not have the Limited Edition, and this comes with the game itself, and then it also comes with a Blu-ray that I believe is kind of like a documentary making of, and then also a CD soundtrack, which is pretty awesome, so I'm pretty stoked to add this to my collection. And with this, I also have some more Metal Gear stuff we'll be talking about, but we'll get to those next. Then the next game that I got from Jason was The Order 1886 for the PlayStation 4. This was an early release game for the system. Kind of got some gruff at the time because it's kind of a short game. I think it's only like a 4 or 5 hour long game. I've actually been wanting to get this since I've got my PlayStation 4. I was trying to get the collector's edition. I actually had the opportunity to get it for a pretty good price once before, but not exactly what I was willing to pay. But more than happy to add this to the collection, and I am looking forward to checking this out when I can. Then the next game here was one that was actually kind of presented to me as a available game that I could have gotten from Jason by request, but he did notice that I did not have this in my collection, and that is Demon's Souls for the PlayStation 3, and this is the greatest hits version, and that's kind of why I didn't volunteer to take it off his hands, because I usually try to get like the standard non-greatest hits versions, but much as he said, it is better than nothing, so I'm pretty stoked to add this From Software game to my collection. Now I pretty much have everything from PlayStation 3 and up by From Software, and now I need to start getting some of their older releases like the Kingsfield games. And then the last game that I got from Jason was actually the last day of MGC. He actually had a big bin that he was trying to use for game trades. And again, like I said, I saw some pictures of the games that he was trading and kind of didn't want to take the opportunity to snag a few games from there, but at the last second I decided, hey, maybe I should grab one of those games. And as the person who he was trading with was actually kind of starting to pull them out and dig through them, I saw this and I was like, hey, should let me get that, and that is Tiny Toon Adventures for the NES. Now, I've never actually played this one. I used to watch the cartoon when I was a kid, but I have heard that this is a pretty decent game. It's pretty much kind of like your simple, straightforward platformer, but nevertheless, happy to add this to the collection. Then the next thing here, actually a friend Tom had hit me up a while ago and asked if I had any interest in these and I could just have them. And I said, absolutely. And we just happened to hadn't seen each other since then, and I'm kind of surprised that he brought these along to MGC, so that's pretty neat. And when he saw me, he gave these to me then, which is pretty cool. First one being, this is an action figure of Fortune from Metal Gear Solid 2, and then he also gave me a couple pieces of a Metal Gear Ray from Metal Gear Solid 2. Now, I doubt I will ever find the other pieces to this Metal Gear Ray, but if I ever get a Metal Gear Ray, hey, I got a couple backups. So thank you very much for those. So then moving on to the day before the Midwest Gaming Classic, the Friday, me, Jason of Corpse Flood Gaming, met up with Chris, the old-ass retro gamer, and we'd previously planned to hit up a local Milwaukee store called Make Sense, which is basically a kind of a variety collector store, not focused on video games, but they had video games, they have all sorts of collectibles, and I brought along a box of trades that I was hoping to just kind of unload with them and get some store credit and nab a few things, and they actually had some pretty cool stuff and were nice enough to take my trades. There's a lot of very random things, but I got a fair amount for them. And one of the first things I grabbed was something that was on my MGC wish list for this year, and that was Metal Gear Solid Portable Ops for the PSP. I already have Metal Gear Solid Portable Ops Plus, and with this puts me one game away for a complete Metal Gear collection as far as I'm concerned. I don't think I'll ever own the MSX Metal Gear games because they are way too expensive, and the only other game I need is actually one that I kind of already have, and that's Metal Gear Solid 3D for the 3DS. I have Metal Gear Solid 3, but that's the 3DS version that's 3D, and I thought it would be neat to have that in my collection. I will get it eventually. I'm not in a big rush. I wasn't able to find it at MGC, but happy to be super close to having a complete Metal Gear collection. And the last Metal Gear thing that I got this year, I actually have a couple other of these that I'd previously gotten from Justin, one of the previous co-hosts of the Game Tenants podcast. He had hooked me up with 2 figures, and I was fortunate to find one of these at Makes Sense, and that is Psycho Mantis from Metal Gear Solid. And Justin previously gave me Solid Snake and Liquid Snake, so that's pretty cool. There's a couple more of these that I'd like to add to the collection. I'm not really going out of my way. If I come across them, I will get them, but it's pretty neat to be able to get another one of these. And then on to the games that I got at Makes Sense. The first one here is one that I'm kind of disappointed that I haven't had thus far, but I just, for whatever reason, haven't gotten this game. I've played it before, I've beaten it before, I've rented it before, I've played the arcade version, but I'm excited to say I finally have Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, Turtles in Time for the Super Nintendo. Possibly the best beat 'em up there is. I have some other favorites pretty high up on the chart, but this is one of them, so stoked to get this. Then the next game here is one that I rented when I was younger, and I haven't had it since, so pretty excited to add this to the collection, and that is Ninja Gaiden 2, The Dark Sword of Chaos. Again, this is a sequel to Ninja Gaiden. Awesome platformer with ninja, kind of renowned for its difficulty. And hopefully someday I will get Ninja Gaiden 3. I doubt I'll ever get the Ninja Gaiden trilogy because that's pretty pricey, but it is what it is. Then the next game here, I actually didn't really realize it was the sequel. When I pointed the game out, the employee was kind of bundling up the things for me, and my reading comprehension apparently lacks a little bit, and I thought I was getting the first game, ended up getting the second game, but that's totally fine. And this is Top Gun: The Second Mission, and not really a complaint there because basically Top Gun 2 improves on the first one. It's relatively the same thing, they just add some extra graphics, kind of change up a few gameplay elements, but at least they still have that awesome aircraft carrier landing segment. And yeah, surprisingly enough, even though they're cheap games, I just haven't had them in my collection yet, so I'll get Top Gun 1 eventually. Then another cheap game that hasn't been in my collection, and it was a game that I rented when I was younger, and that is Rad Racer. This is a pretty cool racing game for the Nintendo. This is actually the first game by Squaresoft. Who knew they would go on to make some of the greatest RPGs ever, but glad to finally add this one to my collection. And then the next game here was one that I've never really played much of this series. I know quite a bit about the PC versions of these, but this is Ultima Exodus. Only other Ultima game that I've played was the Black Gate for the Super Nintendo, and I don't really know a whole lot about the NES versions. I know the PC versions were insanely robust games with so much to them, more than even still a lot of games today. So I'm pretty interested to see how the NES versions hold up. I'm not exactly sure of the order of the games. I don't know if this is the first one in the series, but I will eventually try to get the other games and try to make the time to check them out. Then this last game here, I actually didn't pick up for the game, but for the accessory that it comes with, and that is SOCOM US Navy SEALs for the PlayStation 2. Now the reason I picked this up is because this comes with a headset that is usable with the PlayStation 2, and there is a game that I've gotten previously at MGC years prior called Lifeline, which actually uses the headset to communicate with the character in the game, to command her to move around and perform certain actions. And it looked like a pretty cool game, so I needed the headset to play that. Could have gotten the headset before by itself, but I wanted to get the kind of complete in-box bundle that it originally came with, so pretty stoked to get that. And then the last thing that I got at Makes Sense was just trying to use up the last few dollars that I had for the store credit. I actually didn't know that last year at MGC, Makes Sense had set up a booth. Then they brought a whole bunch of strategy guides, and I picked up a bunch of strategy guides and didn't even know that that was the store until Chris actually told me about it. So decided to hit up their strategy guides, and I got Tomb Raider: The Last Revelation. Not a game that necessarily needs a strategy guide, but you know what the heck. So then on to the MGC pickups themselves. These are the things that I got at MGC. Again, I had a MGC wish list of very specific games that I was looking for. Nothing too wild, just a few things to round out some collections, a couple random games. Unfortunately, I was only able to find a few of them, but you know, them the breaks. But I'm pretty excited with what I got regardless. And first one here was one of the games at the top of my list that I was looking for, so glad I was able to find this. And it was a pretty fair price, and that is Resident Evil Deadly Silence. Now this is the DS version of Resident Evil. It's basically a remake of the original Resident Evil, but this is actually a really faithful port of the game, and it's kind of neat that with the dual screens, the lower screen actually has the map viewable at all times, so that's pretty convenient. I've heard really good things about the game, and really stoked to add this to the collection. And then with that, I actually was able to get the last Resident Evil game that I need for my Resident Evil collection, and that is Resident Evil Mercenaries 3D. This is basically the 3DS version of Resident Evil Mercenaries, which is a additional bonus mode that started in Resident Evil 4. I believe it's in Resident Evil 5 as well. Not sure if it's in 6, but you play a lot of side characters and kind of do time attacks, time trial sort of things, defeat waves of enemies. But this is the last Resident Evil game that I needed for the Resident Evil series. I now have all Resident Evil games available, along with a couple other accessories, so that is pretty exciting. That's a series I've been looking to round out for quite a while, and glad to say I finally did that. And then the last game that was on my list was kind of just a game that looked pretty interesting, nothing too crazy. I've heard good things about it. It's actually a spiritual successor to a not-so-quality game called X-Blades, but this is called Blades of Time. This is basically kind of like a 3D action sort of beat-em-up game, but it actually uses some pretty cool mechanics in the game and has a badass female lead. So yeah, happy to add this to the collection. Then this next game was not necessarily on my list, but I was hoping to run into the developer. We'd been talking for a while, and when I had originally backed this game, I got a different version, but this is FX Unit Yuki for the Mega Drive or the Sega Genesis. This is a port of the game that went to Kickstarter, originally for the TurboGrafx 16. They also have a Dreamcast port that I have on pre-order right now, but at the time I wasn't able to back as much as I wanted to get the Mega Drive version. I had been in contact with Sarumaru, and fortunately I was able to get a copy of this as well. And this is pretty neat because it actually comes with a manual. The game's on the cart, playable on the Genesis. So now I have pretty much every release that they've done, and I have a nice little FX Unit Yuki collection to add this to. Then this next game was one that I didn't even know existed a couple days prior to me picking this up, when Jason of Corpse Blood Gaming came down the night before we went to Milwaukee, where I busted out the SNES Classic, which I had thrown a bunch of extra games on there, a bunch of stuff I wasn't familiar with, and we were just checking out some things and just happened to check this out, and I'm glad we did because it was a pretty neat game. And this is Kendo Rage for the Super Nintendo. Now, when I initially started playing this game, it really reminded me of the Valis games from the Master System Genesis, kind of your side-scroller action game. But really what stood out to me was the amount of character animations that the female lead has. Everything from straight attacks, upward attacks, downward attacks, jumping attacks, different animations for everything. It's pretty impressive. The game is bright and colorful, has some vocal emotes to go along with it, so yeah, super interested to really delve into this one. It looks neat. And then because I wasn't able to find any other games off of my wish list, there was a couple other games that have been kind of on my want list for a long time, and was pretty excited to find these and finally add these to my collection. The first one being Darkstalkers: The Night Warriors for the PlayStation 1. I have Darkstalkers 3. Unfortunately, Darkstalkers 2, I believe, was never released on any other system besides the Saturn. I don't have a Saturn, and I gotta kind of imagine the game's probably expensive. I don't know, but I'm a big fan of the Darkstalkers series, even though I don't really play fighting games much anymore. This is one of my favorite fighting game series. Really love the style and kind of the occult, classic monster sort of characters. And I've always been a really big fan of Morrigan. And for those who might not know, I actually have Morrigan tattooed on my arm. Not necessarily because I love the character so much. I really liked the art for this, but I do really like the character and kind of meshed well with the idea it's going for my tattoo. So yeah, happy to add Darkstalkers to my collection. I know there is a long box version of this, thanks to Justin. I wasn't aware, or maybe I did know, so we'll see about getting that version eventually as well. Then the last game that I got at MGC was another game that, like I said, has been on my want list for quite a while. Didn't get great reviews, but it still looks really cool to me, and that is Red Ninja End of Honor. This kind of reminds me a lot of the Tenchu games, but like I said, the reviews weren't great. It was kind of middle of the road, so I'm sure it's lacking some features that maybe the Tenchu games have, but I haven't played it yet, so I can't really say. And this one I got for a really good price, so that's awesome. So then the last thing that I got at the Midwest Gaming Classic is a bunch of posters. If you've seen my previous MGC pickup videos, every year I always got to hit up some artists. I really love game art. I love fan art. I have lots of fan art posters on my wall, and this year was no exception. But the first poster here is actually one similar to one that I got last year. I've mentioned before, I'm part of a Facebook retro gaming community called the Midwest Retro Gamer Society. It's not really a buy-sell trade group, it's just a group meant to talk about video games. Last year we actually had a group meetup. Ben and one of the other members put this together, and it's a really cool poster to kind of commemorate the Midwest Gaming Classic 2019, and it says 2019 attendee. So huge thanks, guys. I love the poster. You really outdid yourselves this year. Thank you very much for that. Then the next poster here, if you've seen my previous MGC pickup videos, the last 2 years I've actually picked up art by this artist, and this year I picked up a piece that he did for Hollow Knight. The artist is Rainark. I have 6 other pieces by him on my wall currently. I have a couple Overwatch characters, one from Nier Automata, I have Samus from Metroid, Solid Snake from Metal Gear, and Talizora from Mass Effect. So pretty stoked to add this to the collection and get this up on the wall. The next poster, I'd actually walked by this table a few times, didn't really know what was up, and then this time when I walked by, I realized, hey, this is art by the original artist that did Konami artwork for the NES, and these actually, they had a representative that was selling signed pieces by the artist, and the artist is Tom Dubois, who did most of the Konami artwork for the NES. He had some really cool Castlevania ones. Metal Gear Snake's Revenge is a pretty significant game for me from the NES. This was actually my favorite NES game for quite a long time. Not to knock it anymore, it's not my favorite NES game, but I still really like the game and really like the art, and it's pretty neat to be able to get a piece of signed work by the artist that did it. Then these last 2 posters, there was a table that was selling posters, I think it was 2 for $10 or 2 for $15, so I decided to grab 2 of them. Mainly I just wanted this one piece, and that is the cover art for Chrono Trigger. I absolutely love Chrono Trigger. I love this piece. Actually, back in middle school, I hand drew essentially a poster version of this that I no longer have. It wasn't colored, but I did a pretty good job at the time, so really excited to get this on my wall. Then the other piece that I got as part of the deal is one from Final Fantasy VI. Even though it says Final Fantasy III, I thought we were at the point where we were acknowledging the proper order of the Final Fantasy games, but it is what it is. It says Final Fantasy III even though it's Final Fantasy VI. They had a poster for Final Fantasy IV that also said Final Fantasy II. That was actually a cooler poster, but Final Fantasy VI is my jam, so it's nice to be able to rep that game on my wall. So that is my pickups from the Midwest Gaming Classic 2019. Again, like I said, not everything from my wish list, but I got some awesome stuff nonetheless. I would love to hear your thoughts on some of these games, especially the ones that I haven't played, stuff like Red Ninja, Ultima Exodus, and Kendo Rage. Anybody familiar with those? Let me know your thoughts. And then of course, as always, I would love to hear your thoughts on any of these games that I picked up. Again, I want to encourage you to check out my other MGC 2019 videos. And hey, if you're interested, I did videos for MGC 2018 and 2017. So with that said, this is going to wrap it up for this year's MGC series of videos that I did, and I am so excited for Midwest Gaming Classic 2020, and you will see very similar videos for that next year. So again, let me know your thoughts. Thank you very much for watching, and I will talk to you next time on the Game Grinder.